All right, welcome everyone to class 2 of the 2023 CISSP mentor program. Real quick, before we get going in this, I'm going to give a shout out to Carlos in Puerto Vallarta. I told him I would. He signed up for the class while I was on vacation. I talked him into it. So welcome. Hopefully he's listening. All right. So last class, it was introductory. That was your lightest class. So hopefully that wasn't overwhelming with Evan. So today we've got 200 some odd slides to get through, but before we really dive in, gotta have the dad joke. So what do you call what do you call the boss at Old McDonald's farm? The CIEIO. All right, there you go, everybody. All right, just very quick, who am I? That's me. I work at FRSecure almost 7 years. This is my 6th year teaching the program. Co-hosted the Unsecurity podcast first with Evan and then with now with Oscar. Dude just hit 200 episodes, so moving along. This was in here from last year from Ron. I'm stealing it from you because it's a great resource, so I left it in. Thank you for putting this in here. So typical class, what we're going to see is we'll have any questions that we saw in the chats we put together and try to answer those. We'll have a quiz on the previous classes content. We'll talk about any current events. Then we'll do the lecture and you get homework. And then as you've seen in this schedule, there's a couple of breaks where we don't have a class. That's just because we realize everybody, people have jobs, they have family, it's easy to get behind. So that just gives you an opportunity to get caught up and not feel like you're, drowning so much. Because we haven't really dug into the content, I got lucky. There's no quiz tonight. So I didn't have to come up with those questions. Maybe I will put some in after the fact, but there's no quiz live tonight. And then again, make sure you ask your questions in Discord. Again, this is the book. Love the picture of Evan up in the corner. So I left that as well. If you don't have it, you can get it. This class will, it's not going to cover everything in the book by any means, but we're trying to really just hit the important parts. What do you need to memorize? What are the things you need to focus on? And how? Ron, it sounds like you're not muted. Sorry, he's helping out on the back end. So questions about Discord, the live session links, those should go out daily. The instructor slide decks will come out. So about the Discord channel, if you haven't gotten your invite, please email CISSPmentor@FRSecure.com. Do not email CCERT, that is our incident response team. They have gotten some emails. So CISSPmentor@FRSecure.com will get you to the right person. Those session links will be sent on the same day. Make sure it's not getting moved to junk. So look for those. Those will come out on the day of the class. And then the instructor slide decks will be done as soon as they're received. I know I was working on this slide deck until about before the class started, just tweaking it and finalizing stuff. So we'll get those out as quickly as possible. Okay, always a ton of current events. So I'm just going to do one. This came out today. Our IR team on Project Hyphy wrote this up. Windows 0 Day being exploited in ransomware attacks. You can see here what it's talking about. Microsoft did patch this, including 96 other bugs and 45 RCEs as part of the April Patch Tuesday. So you really want to make sure you get those patched. It is being actively exploited. All right, so the exam overview, we're going to be covering security and risk management, which is going to account for 15% of the total test when you take your CISSP. And you'll see there that weighting on the other areas. And one thing to remember, you don't have to be an expert in all. That's just the reality. There's going to be some that you're maybe not as strong in and some that you're really strong in. You can see that these are pretty evenly weighted. So, just try to do your best and don't feel overwhelmed. All right. So yeah, like it says, if you read domain 1 and it felt disjointed, it is in the book, but that's okay. We're here to try and help this make sense. This is the basics. And then what we'll see is as we go through further domains, you'll start seeing repetition or more detail onto some of the higher level concepts that we'll be talking about tonight and on the next class. All right. So part 1, when you see this on the slide deck in orange bolded, you need to know that definition. That is a very important thing to know. We're going to talk about understanding, adhering, and promoting ethics, understanding and applying the security concepts, security governance principles, compliance, legal and regulatory issues, investigation types, and this is very important. You do need to know the difference between the types. And then talking about security policies, standards, procedures, and guidelines, and what the differences are. So again, you're going to see this on all the classes. You'll have the kind of the topics with the bold about what we're going to talk about and what you're going to really need to understand. Next week, Ryan will be covering these sections, so I'm not going to read through them. And yeah, it's a little bit all over the place and out of order, but it's fine. We'll make it work. All right, so professional ethics. This is a really important one. It must be a top concern for all security professionals, period. The code of professional ethics is very testable. You have got to know it and know the order that they come in. They'll give you things like, which of these is the most correct? Well, what do we mean by that? They'll have 2 answers that are correct, but there's going to be a ranking within ISC that says this is 1, 2, 3, and 4. You need to know the order of those. So the code of ethics, the preamble, safety and welfare of society and the common good, duty to our principles and to each other, requires that we adhere and be seen to adhere to the highest ethical standards of behavior. You have to adhere and agree to adhere to the code of ethics to be certified. So we must follow the code of ethics canons, and this is where we're talking about, again, this is a good example of which is the most correct. So canon 1, protect society, common good, necessary public trust and confidence in the infrastructure. Act honorably, honestly, justly, responsibly, and legally, diligent and competent service, and advance to protect the profession. So what you might see, and again, I don't know what's exactly on the test, but just as an example here, you might see a question that asks, which of the following canons is the most accurate? And they might have canon 2 and 4. Well, you need to know canon 2 outrates canon 4. And if your employer has a code of ethics, you will want to see that as well. Let's see. So understand and applying security concepts. Sure. All right. Making sure everything looks good. According to CISSP Online, confidentiality, integrity, availability, authentication, and non-repudiation. All right. Those are really important, but we want to simplify this. We want to talk the same language. So we're going to start with what is our definition of information security? Reason? Well, because it doesn't get any simpler. This is what this is basically our job is at the end of the day, information security, risk management related to confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Now, kind of nice. Hey, we agree with them. That is good. So according to the book, information security refers to processes and methodologies involved in safeguarding the information. What we want to remember again is information security is risk management. We want to manage the risk to our information. How do we do that? Well, you got to consider the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, availability. So think of this as a 3-legged stool. and kind of all, it's a very secure function. They don't always work together. They kind of push and work against each other. We'll talk about that and how that works and why it works. So confidentiality is saying only the authorized people or subjects, computers, whatever that you define subjects as, should access and read information. Opposite is disclosure, which means unauthorized subjects can access or read the information. And then the risk to manage is unauthorized disclosure. So we've accidentally emailed somebody the wrong information. Related to this, least privilege and need to know. Least privilege meaning only giving people the access that they require. Same thing, need to know. I'm only going to give you access to things you need to know. Privacy is a portion of this. It's under confidentiality, not of the other two. And so think of this as keeping, PII, PHI, public personal health information, those types of things, a secret. It's confidentiality. Only those that should have access can get access. Integrity is ensuring that the information is accurate. So there you go. This is an easy one to me. Opposite is alteration and unauthorized alteration. I'm going to go back to the concepts, but really it's thinking if a bank didn't care about data integrity, if you couldn't trust your account balance or the money in your account, that's a problem, right? So authenticity, meaning we know that it's accurate and authentic. Non-repudiation, meaning you can't argue that it's inaccurate. We have proof that it is, that the data is accurate. Availability, it's available when needed, as you can see, to authorized users. Opposite is destruction. Unauthorized destruction could be ransomware, deletion, things like that. So concepts related to availability: accessibility, meaning again it's available; usability, meaning it's usable for the user or the authorized subject; and timeliness, is it up to date? Is it again, kind of go back to the accurate. Is it updated and or is it 8 months old? Is that no good anymore? And then DDoS attacks, ransomware, that's where you see availability. System outages as well, right? That could be it doesn't always have to be a malicious attack. All right, so CISSP triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. They must be balanced depending on the context. And we'll go through this a little bit more. And then, funny enough, the opposite of CIA is DAD: disclosure, alteration, and destruction. So what are variations? Because why not make it more complicated? As if we don't have enough to deal with all these acronyms. Let's just throw some more wood on the fire, coal on the fire, whatever you want to say. NIST 833 added to that accountability. So that kind of goes back to that non-repudiation, and then assurance that they will work as intended. But of course, we then had the Parkerian Hexad add to it of their own definition: authenticity of proper attribution to the person, utility, usefulness, which, gosh, I think we've kind of covered already, right? And possession or control, and the physical state. So a lot of just additional words that were already covered to some extent in the CIA triad. All right, from the exam outline, how do we evaluate and apply security principles, governance principles? So we're going to talk through this. First, understanding the definition of security governance. Security governance is the set of responsibilities, policies, and procedures related to defining, managing, and overseeing security practices at an organization. What does that mean? Well, We're saying somebody needs to be responsible for overseeing your policies and procedures and making sure that the practices that have been defined are being implemented and executed appropriately. So always want to make sure that we understand and know what the definition is so that we don't get into this and go, wait, what were we talking about? All right. Very important. Information security, not an IT issue. Now, most of us have seen where businesses say, nope, that's IT. No, it's not. It is a business issue. So what or who is ultimately responsible for information security in a business? Board of directors. Okay. If there isn't a board of directors, your top executive, CEO, president, whatever the top executive is, that is who is responsible for information security at the business. We understand a business is in business to make money or potentially there to serve as a mission or have a purpose. But at the end of the day, if a business isn't making money, they're not going to be in business. So you need to keep that in mind from a security perspective. And then if information security does not provide value to the organization's purpose, why are we doing it? Why are we doing what we're doing? So we need to make sure we align and provide value to the organization. How do we do that? It really is where proper governance is where that starts. Working with those board of directors, that top level executive team, because ultimately they're the ones that are going to be, again, responsible for allocating funds and staff and things like that. All right, so evaluate and apply security governance principles. Again, you'll notice the orange there, very important to know and understand these things. So we're going to want to make sure we align our security with the company's business strategies, goals, missions, and objectives. We don't want to be thought, you don't want information security to be thought of as the Department of No. We need to work with the business. I always like to look at it as like a seesaw, right? At what level is, okay, we're wide open so the business can do everything they want versus we're totally locked down and 100% secure, but nobody can do anything. So what's the right balance between being secure and helping the company achieve its goals? Organizational process to involve information security around acquisitions, all those types of things, new systems, things like that. We need to have roles and responsibilities defined throughout the organization. We'll talk through, identifying a security control framework to align the organization with, and we'll talk through several of those. And then due diligence and due care, and we'll again talk through those. So here's what we're going through. All right, aligning security to the company's business. You have to understand, like it says there, intimate. That is very important. Understand the company. We cannot impede the organization's ability to operate. And if we don't know that mission, that purpose, that strategy, what's driving the business, we better find out, because as information security, you're never going to be successful if you don't have a good relationship with the business and work with them. I always like to say, like I mentioned, don't be the Department of No. Yes, but I like that one. Yes, we can do that, but here are the risks. And if they're good with that, great. Defining and managing the processes to involve information security. So having a governance committee is great. They should be meeting regularly, monthly at least. What is the security function? What is the guidance to help the security align with the company's strategy? And then provide oversight for the security function. What you'll see is with that committee, security then has some accountability, as well as building, like it says here, building rapport with the other business units. So you want to have in your security committee a good representative sample of the business units. Don't want to overwhelm it, but You might have a sales and operations, manufacturing, training, whatever those groups are, because information security is going to affect, those things that get put into place are going to affect each of them differently. So we want to get a good wide view of the organization to make sure we don't, hamper anything. All right. So talking about mergers and acquisitions, you must consider risk in merger and acquisition activity, right? We've seen it with was it Hyatt or Hilton, whoever the hotel chain was that bought a breach. You don't want to know if they're wide open. So really what we're saying here is before you purchase or do a merger and acquisition, you really should conduct a risk assessment and testing ahead of time. There's a couple of ways you can do that. Maybe you do an initial risk assessment reviewing policies and documents before it becomes widely known, just to get an idea of what their security program is. And then you can decide, all right, we're going to go ahead and purchase this based on the fact they have an IR plan, they've got policies, they've done pen testing. But then before you integrate them, you would want to then do a much more in-depth, pen test and scanning and all that. You don't want to open yourself up to somebody else's bad practices. All right, roles and responsibilities. Hey, everyone in the organization has an information security role to play. Now, how many do you think know that, right? Well, yeah. Part of the job is to evangelize and communicate and help people fulfill their role. One thing that I think in information security we do poorly, and we've talked about this on the podcast, and Evan and I have talked about this for, almost 7 years now. We don't do a good job talking to quote unquote the normal people. We're not normal in information security. We're far outnumbered in terms of just sheer numbers. And if we go to them and talk to them in acronyms and technical talk and all that, it's going to go over their head. So we have to learn to talk and communicate with the business in a way that the business understands and can comply with. So some common roles according to the book. You'll have a CISO, Chief Information Security Officer. This is a senior level executive responsible for the overall management and supervision of the security program. All right, there you go. Ultimately responsible for the security of the company's systems and infrastructure. And then depending on the reporting structure, CIO and CEOs who they report to. Again, ultimately, it should be the board who's responsible. I think that's poorly worded. It's ultimately responsible for the security. Okay, well, we'll just have to go with it, know it for the exam. And in reality, it would be a board and C-level. Easy way to remember the CISO's job. Again, this is reality, what we see versus book learning. You want to consult the business and implement the business's risk decision. Here is our risk. Here are our options. Here's the one I recommend. What do you, the business, want to do? And then answer questions. Hopefully they would give you feedback or ask questions, clarify, and then it's your job to implement what they decide. There you go. It's not your job to decide the business's risk decision. It's to consult and provide guidance to them and then implement their decisions. All right. Chief Security Officer. Okay, responsible for all physical security and personnel security. Many organizations have merged CSO into CISO, but according to the book, and again, this is the gospel for this exam, you need to know the difference. So when you're looking at this, if they say they may have a question that says, and it would be which of the following roles would be responsible. If they say information security, then it would be the CISO. If it's physical security or personnel security, if it has anything to do with people, probably going to be the Chief Security Officer on the exam. Just make sure you look at the context of the question anytime you see those titles used. And yeah, super confusing. Why, I don't know. It hasn't changed. Additional roles, security analyst. So this is a technical expertise doing day-to-day work, data analysis, firewall management, incident handling, other operational activities. The manager or program manager may have one or more processes related to this. So it could be your vulnerability management, maybe your endpoint management, server management, things like that. All right, user responsibilities. Understand, agree, and adhere to policies, procedures, standards, and guidelines. And we'll get through all those, what those mean. Relevant regulatory and compliance requirements, and relevant contractual obligations such as NDAs. Now, I personally don't like that they say understand, agree, and adhere to, because we know, I mean, looking at policies, those are written at grad level, and the average reading level in the US at least is somewhere in the 8th or 9th grade level. So are they really going to understand something that's written at a much higher level? I agree that they need to agree to them and understand they must adhere to, but just me. Complete information security training and awareness activities and report incidents. So everybody does have a role, even if it's not specifically called out in those previous couple roles. The user role is going to be that kind of catch-all for everyone. All right, now for some fun. We're going to talk control frameworks. Notational construct outlining the organization's approach to security, including a list of specific security processes, procedures, and solutions used by the organization. They'll often use it based on the industry, and some really common ones, and we're going to go, there's a ton of them out there. ISO 27001 and 2, the NIST 853, NIST CSF, CIS critical security controls, there's NIST 800-171. I mean, we could go on and on and on. But you're going to need to know kind of the basics about these. So we're going to talk about ISO 27001. It is part of that standard. It's by the International Organization for Standards. So typically what I've seen is organizations that are based in the US don't all very often go with ISO. That's more of an internationally recognized one. So if it's a international company, then they tend to go more with that ISO framework. It is a little confusing. The most recent version was in 2013, but there was a revision in 2018. It was mostly grammatical and things like that. So keep that in mind. 2013 is really, if there are people who are using that, that's going to be fundamentally the same. There's only going to be some minor changes in the 2018 version. So there's 114 controls across these 14 domains. And what you'll see is, as we go through these, the domains are very similar. The controls are very similar. It's going to be slightly different wording. One thing to remember, ISO standards are copyrighted. It cannot be freely shared. If you share copyrighted material, you're actually violating the ethics code for CISSP. So don't do that. ISO 27002. So 27001 is what you should be doing. 27002 is more of how you should be doing it. So that's kind of the way to keep those in mind is 27001. Here are all the things you should be doing. And then 27002 is kind of how to do those things. Easy peasy. All right. So NIST 853. This is from the US Department of Commerce. Very comprehensive and very prescriptive. There's, 300 something security controls across 18 domains. Now, I'm not going to read all these off, but you will want to know these and understand what's in there. And you can see, again, if we look at what the ISO standard and the NIST 853, there's a lot of overlap on that. So there you go. That is freely available. And you can download and read that to your heart's content when you are having trouble sleeping. Now, the cybersecurity framework, personally, I like this one for most businesses. So first published in 2014, standards, guidelines, and best practices. And there's 5 core functions with multiple subdivisions that they call categories. Again, why are we making this more complicated? So one thing to remember, they might give you a question about what framework is this, and knowing, oh, well, the CSF has 5 core functions with subdivisions or categories under it. You'll know that's CSF, not 853 or ISO 27000. So the 5 core functions: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. Again, I think this is a good approach. It works well. And then it breaks it down under, these are your categories underneath those functions. And again, what you'll see, gosh, very similar to what we've already talked about. So it really comes down to what works best for the organization. ISO for international, NIST 853 if you work with a government, NIST CSF, again, well known and respected, more, I think, business friendly, and still has all the required areas in it. Now, last one we're going to talk about, CIS critical security controls, initially by SANS and then moved to the Center for Internet Security in 2015. Yeah, CIS 7.1 is most likely the one that will be in the exam, because version 8 was released in May 2021, which was around the same time as the exam. And I have not seen any update on that. So I'm sure I'll be corrected if I'm wrong on that, but just understand and know what these controls are. Again, these are the 7.1. If that is incorrect, we'll get this updated, but as far, like I said, best of my knowledge, this is correct. So again, as we look through these controls, it's the same things, right? So this is where understanding and memorization are really going to come into play, knowing how to recognize the difference in these different frameworks for the exam. Again, CIS controls freely available. So the only one you don't have access to is ISO. If you want to read up on them, there you can Google it, and there are write-ups about it, but you can't actually get the framework itself unless you pay for it. So here's a mapping of really what the difference is. They kind of combined some stuff and just cleaned it up a little bit. But again, version 7.1 is the one that should be on the exam. All right. Due care, due diligence, very, very important. These are legal terms, looking at negligence and liability. So what is the difference? Due care is the effort made by an ordinarily prudent or reasonable party to avoid harm in another or to another. So prudent man defense is where you would see here. When I did whatever actions I took, is it that a reasonable person would have conducted that, right? So in that due care relates to the conduct that a reasonable person would exercise to maintain confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So again, there we're going to see that CI triad, and we're already, just a little bit into class, the first domain, we're already starting to see that leveling and stacking on each other. So when you look at this nowadays, you would say, if somebody had a breach and they had never had penetration testing, they'd never had done a risk assessment, they had policies that were 5 or 6 years old, they didn't have a good patch management, do they have a prudent man defense? That would be a very hard argument to win. So it's, again, what would be reasonably expected under the same or similar circumstances? Due care. What are we doing? Are we doing prudent, reasonable exercises to protect confidentiality, integrity, and availability? Due diligence is the continually ensuring that behavior maintains due care. Okay, so we've done due care, but we can't just say, yes, we patched. Yeah, okay, that's due care, you should patch. But due diligence is ensuring that it's ongoing. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So when we're looking at that, the failure to demonstrate due care or due diligence can and will increase the risk of being found negligent and or liable for a bad event. So this, when we talk about defensible, this is, have you exercised due care and due diligence? Have you done what a reasonable person would do? And have you continued to do those things? Because we all know, we've talked about it ad nauseum, that, hey, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. It's going to happen if somebody wants to get to you. So have you done reasonable things and continue to do those things to prevent a breach? And that's what you want to be. You want to be defensible in court. Determining compliance and other requirements. So we'll talk through that. What is compliance? Well, there you go. Adherence to a mandate. There we go. So that is further on there. Set of activities that an organization conducts to understand, satisfy applicable laws, regulatory requirements, industry standards, and contractual requirements. So to be compliant, you need to understand what laws you're under, what regulatory requirements you're under. Are there industry standards that you must comply with, right? And then contractually, what do you have in your contracts that you must agree to and provide? So what was information security? We covered that earlier. Information security is risk management. Well, compliance is adherence to a mandate. So compliance and information security, are not the same. We can get to compliance through information security, but being compliant does not mean you have a good information security program. Legislative regulatory requirements. So who has jurisdiction, or which jurisdiction has legal authority? This could be states in the US, right? So we need to know what that is, if it's international. So understanding whose jurisdiction you're under and who has legal authority, that's going to be very important to determine. And then at the bottom, compliance, absolutely the number one driver for information security investments. You've seen it, with third-party risk management that just came out from the Department of Labor. The SEC is looking at it. You've got HIPAA, all those things, they're compliant with the regulatory driver, and that's what's driving that money. In most, there's a law to define what is permissible, what's not. In the US, there are two punishments. There's under law, it's criminal punishment, civil liability. We'll talk through this. We'll need to know what those are. And then you have statutes and regulations. So statutes written and adopted by the legislative bodies, so the US Congress. And then regulations are how the execution of the statute will be performed. Statutes and regulations are legally enforceable. Regulations are the subordinate to the statute. So the statute comes out that says you must do third-party risk management. All right. The regulation will then come out and lay out, here are the things you must do to be compliant with the statute that says you have to do this. You'll need to know these acts and laws here. So the Computer Security Act of 1987, created by established by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, is responsible for setting computer security standards for unclassified non-military government systems, and that the NSA for classified government and military systems. Now, it did get repealed by that FISMA in 2002. So you will need to know I would say probably not much more than what's on here. That, hey, U.S. Computer Security Act in 1987 established NIST for unclassified non-military and NSA for classified and military, and was repealed by FISMA. I wouldn't go a whole lot deeper than that. FISMA, U.S. federal government agencies and non-government organizations must conduct risk-based security assessments that align with a NIST risk management framework. Whew. All right, there you go. All federal government agencies and non-government organizations that provide information services have to conduct risk-based security assessments. So that's what you need to know. Industry standards, there's a whole bunch of them. The ones that typically show up: Sarbanes-Oxley, System and Organization Control, and then Payment Card Industry, or PCI. Sarbanes-Oxley Act 2002. Again, you'll want to make sure you understand enough about each of these that you're able to tell them apart. Again, remember the exam is, an inch deep and a mile wide. They're not going to go into a whole lot more detail, but you're going to need to know these well enough to know the difference between the different industry standards and compliance regulations. Just some history: SOX was enacted to reestablish public trust in publicly traded companies following several high-profile scandals. Again, the bold there: minimize conflicts of interest, provide investors with appropriate risk information, and place civil and criminal penalties on executives for false financial disclosures and protections for whistleblowers. Again, here's another one: public Company Accounting Oversight Board. You need to know that that's responsible for overseeing implementation of SOX, and that their auditing standards identify the role that information systems play in maintaining financial records. So again, Sarbanes-Oxley, going back 2002, established public trust in publicly traded companies and public accounting firms. Knowing, you might see what standard was created, or what companies must comply with the following controls of which standard, right? So it'll be minimize conflicts of interest, provide investors appropriate risk information, civil and criminal penalties. And you need to know that's Sarbanes-Oxley. Now we have SOC. Hey, not often confused with SOX. Yes, I can see that. At least they did different letters, and it's not like SOCK and SOCKS. That would have really been miserable. Anyway, auditing framework, giving organizations flexibility to be audited based on their own needs. 3 types: SOC 1, SOC 2, and SOC 3. We'll go through those. You'll need to know that, though. Report types align with the standards outlined in the Statement on Standards for Attestation Engagements, or SSAE 18, published by the AICPA. So you'll need to know, if you see SSAE or AICPA, that is a SOC. SOC 1 is really focused on financial statements. A company that performs credit card processing may need a SOC 1. SOC 2 and SOC 3 are more on information security. The way that they do this is they have these 5 trust service principles. So there's a keyword right there. Those are the 5: privacy, security, availability, processing, integrity, and confidentiality. Security is also the most common one. The others are only typically if there's, from my experience, if there's been a contractual requirement. So security or common criteria is kind of what the main one is. The AICPA has put out a list of the different controls that you have to have in place to comply. And then the organization writes what they do to comply with it. So just a little background on that. SOC 3 is the light version. It just is really a publicly available. So it just says that there were, this was the scope or, kind of the high level. It may be a call center, for example, and that they were fully compliant with no exceptions found. There you go. PCI DSS is credit cards. Version 4 was published in March of 22. Highly unlikely that that will be on the exam. So what do we need to know about PCI? Well, it was established in 2004. We'll kind of skip around here, not governed by or enforce any government body. So what happened is the credit card agency said, the government said, hey, we're going to regulate you. And the credit card said, no, we've got PCI DSS. We're good. You don't need to regulate us. We'll regulate ourselves. So there's 200 security controls into 12 requirements, and then categorized into 6 goals that generally align with security best practices. You have to be a PCI QSA to do that. If you take credit cards, you need to know what level you're falling under. But again, for the exam, PCI DSS, understand, again, this is 3.2, which is the version most likely on the exam. Building and maintain a secure network, protect cardholder data. So if you see a question that says cardholder data, that's probably a pretty good indicator that you're going to be looking at PCI. But don't just make assumptions, read the question and understand the whole statement before you answer. Maintain vulnerability management, implement strong access control measures, regularly monitor and test networks, and then maintain information security policy. And again, gosh, who could have thought that you would have almost the exact same thing in yet another standard and compliance requirement? If you go back here, it is a little bit more prescriptive, right? Install, maintain firewall configuration to protect cardholder data. Well, in the others, it does say, maintaining firewalls. Again, cardholder data is your indicator there that they're probably talking about PCI. Protect cardholder data. Well, encrypt transmission of cardholder data. Well, I know they talk about encryption a lot in the others. It's that cardholder data. All right. Really important. Privacy is a subset of information security and not the other way around. A lot of people seem to get that backwards. But information security is protecting confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information. Privacy is only the confidentiality of a type of information. Very important to understand the difference. Again, very, very important. What PII does the organization handle? What are the legal, contractual, and regulatory requirements that govern the privacy of that data? You need to know, do I have health information? Do I have credit card information? Do I have, if you're in Europe, do I have to fall under GDPR and understand that? So really important to know as part of your job, what kind of data that the organization handles and what may be protected, and what, at that point, how do I protect it with due care, due diligence? All right. Understand the legal and regulatory issues that pertain to information security in a holistic context. Oh boy, that's fun. So holistic, high level, right? We're looking at everything. We're not necessarily looking at scope, maybe PCI. You have your cardholder environment. Well, PCI is only going to apply to that. Holistically, we're looking at the organization as a whole. So what is the definition of cybercrime and data breach? Cybercrime is any criminal activity that directly involves computers or the internet. All right, that's pretty straightforward. You do need to know the 3 types of cybercrimes and understand how to tell them apart. So crimes against people, cyber stalking, harassment, identity theft, credit card fraud. So it directly impacts a person. Crimes against property. So information stored on a computer itself or the computer itself. So again, hacking, distribution of computer viruses, vandalism, IP theft, copyright infringement, so things like that. So crimes against people affect people, crimes against property affect, look for the word computer. It's information stored on a computer or the computer itself. And then crimes against the government and any cybercrime against a government organization. So that could be hacking, theft of confidential information, or cyber terrorism. And I comment here, hacking is not a crime. Criminal hacking is. There is a difference. Hacking is using something in a way that maybe it wasn't intended. Criminal hacking, where you're, DDoS attack, ransomware, those things, that is illegal. So understanding there is a difference there. All right, what is a data breach? Well, that's a cybercrime where information is accessed or stolen without authorization. So we've had a breach of our confidentiality and potentially availability and potentially integrity, because once it's out of your hands, we can't be sure that it's not going to be manipulated. So target is the information system and the data stored within. So this would be a crime against property. There's a lot of laws around how to govern it and regulate it, but we really want to make sure, and again, just understanding, not necessarily knowing these inside and out, but what are the reference global cybercrime and security laws and regulations? So here you've got some links for United Nations, Interpol, as well. So just good to understand what's defined as cybercrime. Here's a good example in the Interpol. The definition of cybersecurity defined as protection of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Covers political, technical, and administrative dimensions. Cybercrime is offenses committed against computers, computer data, data storage media, systems, service providers. So illegal access, interfering with data and computer systems, fraud, forgery. You get the idea. So again, cybercrime is the opposite of cybersecurity. It's that the DAD triad as opposed to the CIA triad. All right. You will want to know the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act of 1986. It's been revised many times over the year. You'll probably want to know and understand that it's been revised and look kind of recognize those dates. But created to clarify definitions of computer fraud and abuse to extend existing law to include intangible properties such as computer data. Now, the thing that blows my mind, this is just a personal thing, is one of the most relevant cybercrime laws in effect, originally in '86, and really the last update to it was 2001. Granted, yes, there's been other updates and other acts, but still, yikes, crazy. All right, 7 criminal offenses and identifies the penalties. So understanding these offenses is really going to be important. So obtaining national security information, this is a felony. Accessing a computer and obtaining information is a misdemeanor. So you can read through what the difference is. This one can be upgraded to a felony if it's used to gain commercial advantage. So fun. So understand, again, obtain national security information, accessing a computer and obtaining information, trespassing in a government computer. So this is extending that definition of trespassing to computing. Accessing to defraud and obtain value. This was a big one. So felony act, knowingly accessing a protected computer without or in excess of authorization with the intent to fraud. So important to know that one. Damaging a computer or information. So what's crazy is, I said it's nuts that it hasn't been updated, but realistically reading through it again, I realized, yeah, it's probably still pretty relevant. It's how those things have happened has changed, but trafficking of passwords. So we don't want to, it makes it illegal to traffic passwords or threatening to damage a computer. So they're saying it's a variation of extortion. So US Electronic Communications Privacy Act of 1986. So wiretaps, for restrictions on wiretapping, to include computer network-based communications, just rather than just telephone calls, complements the CFAA by prohibiting eavesdropping, interception, and unauthorized monitoring. Put some exceptions in place to monitor their networks for business reasons if they notice their users are of monitoring. And then you'll need to know that Patriot Act made extensions to these amendments. So that again, what do you need to know? What's the level you really need to know for the exam is these bullet points. As long as you can get through and memorize those bullet points on these different acts, you're probably in pretty good shape. All right. Economic Espionage Act of 1996, signed by Bill Clinton in 1996. Federal law, first federal law to broadly define and establish strict penalties for theft or unauthorized use of trade secrets. Very important to know that, and we'll talk about trade secrets as well. It makes it a criminal offense to copy, download, upload, alter, steal, or transfer trade secrets for the benefit of a foreign entity. So there you go. Economic Espionage Act is defining and establishing penalties for theft or unauthorized use of trade secrets. Child Pornography Prevention Act. It's pretty straightforward. Restrict and punish production of distribution of child pornography on the internet. All right. Identity Theft and Assumption Deterrent Act. So this is establishing identity theft as criminal under U.S. federal law, and it's defined as knowingly transferring or using without lawful authority a means of identification of another person with the intent to commit or to aid or abet any unlawful activity. So again, pretty straightforward, just making sure you know what these are about and the dates. Patriot Act of 2001. Again, Congress people really love their acronyms and all that. So you've got your providing appropriate tools required to intercept and obstruct terrorism, or Patriot. Came into law in 2001 in response to the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001. It was originally a temporary measure, but they were most of them were reauthorized in 2006 and made amendments to many other provisions within the CFAA and ECPA with new definitions of criminal offenses and new penalties. So again, when did it come into place? It was reauthorized in 2006, and then amendments to those previous laws. So here are some of the laws and sections. So again, authority to intercept wire, oral, electronic communications. Now, when I took it, I don't believe I had to remember all these, but it's been a while, so probably good to be up to date on these. And again, a lot of what we'll see in the CISSP is memorize, 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 repetition. So understanding what the Patriot Act was for and when it came into place. Next, we have the U.S. Homeland Security Act. So it built off Patriot Act. It created Homeland Security, Department of Homeland Security. So that second bullet, really important. This is a new cabinet level position, Secretary of Homeland Security. And then there's several standards, tactics, and controls that should be used to secure U.S. federal government information. So Homeland Security Act after September 11th, the largest government reorganization since Department of Defense in 1947, created that new cabinet level position. Another mouthful, controlling the assault of non-solicited pornography and marketing, or CAN spam. This is the first national standards for commercial emails in response to the complaints over spam or unwanted emails. Created the requirement to allow recipients to unsubscribe or opt out of future emails, and designated the FTC as responsible for enforcing provisions within the Act. So canned spam or spam emails, 2003, that is important to know. All right, U.S. Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act. This established the National Counterterrorism Center and Director of National Intelligence. So understanding those two things is very important. Department of Homeland Security and other U.S. government agencies are required to share intelligence information, and establish Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board with the intent of protecting the privacy and civil liberties of U.S. citizens. Again, a lot of memorization in this exam. You're going to see that a lot. You got to know. You have to know enough to tell these apart. We try to give you the cheat sheet version, so to speak, but there's not going to be any substitute for reading and just memorizing these things. Council of Europe's Convention on Cybercrime, 2001. You also know, it may say what was also known as the Budapest Convention. It'll have several listed. You'll need to know that. First international treaty to address cybercrime by 65 nations. The U.S. in 2006 joined that. So it increases cooperation among nations and establishing more consistent national laws related to preventing and prosecuting cybercrime. Next, we've got Computer Misuse Act of 1990. 5 offenses: unauthorized access to computer material, unauthorized access with intent to commit or facilitate commission of further offenses, unauthorized acts with intent to impair, unauthorized acts causing or creating risk of serious damage, and making, supplying, or obtaining articles for use in other offenses. So again, this one, 5 offenses, Computer Misuse Act. You might see what act do the following fall under. I'll have them listed. You need to know it's the Computer Misuse Act of 1990. All right, Information Technology Act of 2000. I understand this was amended in 2008, and then it was just the legal recognition of electronic devices in India. Cybercrime Act 2001 in Australia. Again, defining serious computer offenses. A lot of these you'll want to know dates, and again, you don't need to go into full depth on these, understanding them. You'll need to know how to tell them apart is really the biggest thing that I remember. Okay, licensing intellectual property requirements. So we're talking about intellectual property or IP. Could be software, data, movies, music, algorithms, drawings, anything that is kind of unique to somebody or an organization is kind of like how I think of this, but we'll fully talk through that here. Laws concerning it in the United States fit into 5 categories, and we're going to talk through these: licensing, patents, trademark, copyright, and trade secrets. You will need to know and be able to tell the difference between them. That is highly testable. All right, licensing. Global, so typically look at this at software, right? Do you have a license for your software? That's pretty straightforward. If you don't have licensing, you're not able to get patches and updates. And you can see the WannaCry malware in China, 70% of computers users in China running unlicensed software. So licensing is related, think of that as related to software. All right, talking about patents. Government issued license or grant of property rights to an inventor that prohibits another party from making, using, importing, or selling the invention for a set period. Very important. Basically, they're saying you make this new, useful, or non-obvious thing and make it available to the public, and we will protect you from anyone else making, using, importing, or selling it. In the US, that's 15 to 20 years. Obviously, patents issued by the US Patent and Trademark Office are only in the US, and vendors must file a patent application in all countries where they want to be protected under national patent law. So again, really the important part here, understanding a patent is a government issued license protecting the property rights. Again, the US is 15 or 20 years, and it must be done in all countries where they want to be protected. European patent, Eurasian, there you go. US law, codified, really important from, I know since we're now international, if you get your CISSP, you need to be familiar with the patent laws in your country or where your organization is doing business. So patent is for government issued. A trademark is a word, phrase, symbol, or design that identifies and distinguishes the source of the goods of one party from those of another. And then so that's the registered trademark, is the R with the circle. A service mark, similar legal grant, identifies and distinguishes the source of a service rather than goods. So I'm sure we can all think of the larger companies that have their phrases that they do with the commercials, and then they have their, you might have a service mark for services. So copyright is legal protection granted to the authors of, and this is important, original works of authorship. So book, movie, songs, poetry, artistic creations, and computer software, life of the author plus 70 years. The original work does not need to be registered to receive copyright protection. So simply creating an original work automatically grants you copyright rights. There is fair use. You want to make sure you understand it. What is fair use? But for the exam, really, like it's the more copyright is works of authorship. So again, more artistic things, as well as computer software, and then life of the author plus 70 years. All right, trade secrets. This could be formula for either the red or the blue soda companies that are out there as a good example. But the proprietary formula, process, practice, or combination of information that a company has exclusive rights to. Trade secret laws are typically left up to the states, but they have a Uniform Trade Secrets Act. Very important, that bottom note. If you don't protect it like it's a trade secret, the courts can find that it's not a trade secret. What I know that we've seen and heard stories of somebody stealing one company's formula, the other company not accepting it and alerting because they want to protect their own trade secrets. They don't want to set that expectation, because we also talked about violating trade secrets is criminal. So import-export controls, understanding sanctions really is what this is. This could be prohibiting business with people, groups, organizations, countries. We have seen this in incident response where a company has had a ransomware and had the FBI come in and say, nope, you cannot pay them. That would be a criminal act. So understanding what those import-export controls, very important. One of the most well-known ones is the U.S. International Traffic in Arms Regulations, or ITAR. So this is regulating defense articles, defense services, and making sure that those sensitive materials only go to the right people. And both government agencies and contractors or subcontractors who handle regulated material. So understanding import-export, you would see ITAR, that'd be a good one. Dual use technology in the EU. So you've got ECPA 428 of 2009. And this was updated in 2017 to cyber weapons. So understanding that there could be other laws as well, but The big thing really, again, understanding import-export controls are about placing sanctions and preventing sensitive material or information from going to those that the government does not want it to go to. All right. In scope for the exam, excuse me, we will need to know all of these things, and we're going to go through all of them. I can sense the excitement through my monitor. All right. Federal Privacy Act of 1974. Again, what we want to know is what's on these slides. How do we tell these things apart, and what is the general purpose of each of these? So, establishing and governing practices related to the collection, maintenance, use, and dissemination of PII by U.S. government agencies, and intended to balance the government's need to maintain information about citizens and permanent residents with the rights of those individuals to keep their personal information private. So, Federal Privacy Act of 1974, how can the government collect, maintain, and use PII of citizens and permanent residents? Yeah, HIPAA, make sure it's HIPAA. I know I've never made that mistake, and nobody believes me, but that's okay. Very important. Act of 1996, the HIPAA privacy rule and security rule went into effect in 2003. There are 3 categories of organizations that must comply, and again, very testable. Health plans. So this is your health insurance company, Medicare, Medicaid, military or vet health programs, things like that. So anybody that's paying for healthcare is really where that falls under. Healthcare providers. So these are where you receive healthcare. Hospitals, doctors, nursing homes, pharmacies, other providers that transmit health information. So this could be also things like physical therapy, those types of things. And then the clearinghouse is any public or private organization that processes or facilitates the processing of non-standard health information to convert it into standard data types. So this is going to be between the healthcare provider and the health plan or the payer. Very important to know those 3 things, understand what falls under each of them, knowing when the privacy rule and security rule went into effect. So the privacy rule established minimum standards for protecting a patient's privacy and regulates the use and disclosure of individuals' health information, referred to as protected health information. PHI is permitted to be used strictly for the purposes of performing and billing for healthcare services and must be protected against improper disclosure or use. So understand what is the privacy rule establishes the standards for protecting PHI. The security rule is standards for protecting PHI that is stored or transferred in electronic form. So it operationalizes that privacy rule, right? So the privacy rule says you have to protect it. Security rule really defines how you must do that by establishing technical, physical, and administrative controls to protect electronically stored PHI, or sometimes you will see it referenced as that ETAC PHI. Very important to know there are large civil penalties ranging from 100 to 50,000 per violation. And this violation could be per record. So maximum penalty of 1.5 million per year. And then there are criminal penalties as well. All right, Health Information Technology for Economic and Clinical Health Act, or high-tech, because that's what I think when I read that at first, right? This is because of the promote the expanded use of electronic health records, or EHR. So it is extended HIPAA protections by improving security and privacy, imposing tougher penalties for HIPAA non-compliance, and the breach notification rule, which covered entities are required to disclose a breach of unsecured PHI to affected parties within 60 days of breach discovery. So high-tech came after HIPAA, and was to promote the expanded use of electronic health records. So they wanted to get everyone off of paper records and onto electronic. And it also created the HIPAA breach notification rule. So again, you might see that where promote expanded use of EHR and introduced the HIPAA breach notification rule. You might see HIPAA and high tech. You need to know the difference between the two. Online or Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. Guidelines for online businesses to protect privacy of children under the age of 13. So that's a really key one there. That's how you're going to tell that one. Any organization around the world that handles the data of children residing in the United States and applies to children that reside outside of the United States if the company is US based. And then FTC can levy penalties, civil penalties for violations. So again, COPPA, Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, strict guidelines for online businesses under the age, to protect privacy under the age of 13. Graham-Leach-Bliley Act, or GLBA. This is really also known Financial Services Modernization Act. Just know the differences there. GLBA, Graham-Leach-Bliley Act. I believe they would spell that out, but just it's good to know. Requiring financial institutions to safeguard their customers' PII. So Graham-Leach-Bliley, financial institutions safeguarding PII. They have to provide a written privacy notice, how it's collected and how it's used, how it's protected. And then the safeguards rule requires implementing proper security controls to protect their customers' personal data. And not in the exam, but there are 9 areas or safeguards that fall into that with multiple sub as well. And not surprisingly, it's very similar to every other standard we've seen, I talked about already. All right, the Data Protection Directive, understanding this is in the EU, Directive 9546 EC. That's good to know. That's probably a good indicator. There's a very definite difference in the way that that's labeled versus the US laws. It was, of course, superseded by the GDPR. Again, a lot of this you're going to see is historical as we go through this. It's been superseded, but what the reason is that we want to know the history. How did we get to where we're at? So even if it's not in place now, we need to know how we got here. And we'll see that as a repeated theme throughout the course as well. Data Protection Act of 1998. Enacts provisions within the EU's Data Protection Directive. So you had the first major privacy law in Europe as the Data Protection Directive, and then the Data Protection Act in the UK enacted it so that they would be in compliance. Again, that was superseded by the Data Protection Act of 2018. All right. Safe harbor. So international safe harbor privacy principles, very important to know this one. Agreement between the US and European Union between 1998 and 2000 to reconcile differences between US and EU privacy laws. It was ruled invalid in 2015 by the European Court of Justice, replaced with US Privacy Shield soon after. That was then declared invalid in 2020. Basically, it allowed the US and European Union companies to work together safely if they've met certain requirements without having to meet all the requirements of all the different countries that they may be in. All right. GDPR, this is the newest one. Again, probably the most, I would say, yeah, probably the world's strongest data privacy act law, established in 2016 to replace EU's Data Protection Directive. Know that. if an organization stores or processes personal data of EU citizens or residents, then GDPR applies regardless of physical location. And there's been all kinds of arguments about that. They're saying, so we won't get into that right now. But for the exam, understand that if the organization stores or processes personal data of EU citizens or residents, GDPR applies regardless if that company is in the EU. There are two types here. You're either a data controller or a data processor. You could be both, but the data controller is for who and why the data is processed. So if your organization decides, hey, we're going to collect this information and here's how we want it processed, you're the data controller. The data processor is the one processing the data. So it's third party, external. It could be, you could be acting as a processor for another. But again, here's a good one of what that means. The data controller determines the process and the means, and then the processor is going to do the processing of the data for that controller. And there are different requirements under if you're a controller or a processor. So Article 5 establishes and describes the 7 principles. There's your key for processing personal data. It must be lawful, fairness, and transparency. So we must be following that. You need to identify specific, explicit, and legitimate purposes. So purpose limitation, data minimization, only collect what we absolutely need and what's been for the agreed upon services. Accurate, we're going to keep it up to date. Storage limitation, stored only as long as necessary. Must ensure integrity and confidentiality of the data, and accountability. So the data controller and stores and processes of personal data compliance with all its principles. Again, a lot of them go after like the ISO 27001 certification because it is that international recognized, and it gives them that defensibility to show they've got their due care and due diligence in place. Article 17, right to be forgotten. So if I don't want to be, I don't want my data used, the organization has to have a process for me to request that, and then are given a specific amount of time to respond to what data they have on the person, and delete any data that's not required for business purposes. Understand Article 25, data protection by design and by default. So basically we've everything is secure, fail safe, as it were. And then Article 33, that data controllers notify authorities within 72 hours of becoming aware of a personal data breach. Really important on GDPR to be able to tell what it is and understand this. So fines, so they take into several things into account when determining the fines. So the nature of the infringement, how much was it, how much damage suffered, is it intentional negligent, were there actions taken to mitigate the damage, what preventative measures were in place, so what they had, and then looking at historical infringements. And again, they can go back under the previous data protection derivative, not just GDPR, to look at that. And this is where having that defensibility and having your due care, due diligence in place really is important. So the rest here, cooperation, if they've been helpful, data types, what happened, or I'm sorry, what types of data did they have? Was it names and email? Was it health records? So there's going to be data types that take into place. If it was proactively reported, or if it was a third party that notified the supervisory authority, were there were they qualified under approved certificates or adhered to certain codes of conduct? So again, this is where having an ISO certification is going to help you out. And then if there were other aggravating and mitigating factors on that. Now they say 20 million euros or 4% of the worldwide annual revenue of the prior financial year, whichever is higher. So they very serious, take that seriously. You don't want to be paying that. All right. Coming up towards the end, hopefully everybody's still with me. We're looking at here investigation types, so administrative, criminal, civil, regulatory, and industry standards. Memorize the terms, burden of proof, understanding what that means. Preponderance of evidence, this is more typically in civil suits. So thinking of this as 50 plus 1 as opposed to beyond a reasonable doubt. Beyond a reasonable doubt must be so clear and compelling that a reasonable person has no doubt or reservation about the defendant's guilt after seeing it. So understanding where those, how those come into play. So burden of proof, the criminal prosecutor, civil plaintiff must either show the preponderance of evidence or in a civil suit or beyond a reasonable doubt in a criminal case. All right. So for ISC squared purposes, administrative investigation is referring to the actions constrained to those conducted within a single organization. So internal investigations, no third party, external, no law enforcement investors, third party suppliers or attackers. Organization can task anyone to perform investigative activities. So burden of proof is the lowest. Preponderance of the evidence is typically where you see that. They can choose, management can choose whatever criteria they choose to believe evidence. And then this could be punitive measure termination, loss of privilege, reassignment. So really it's within an organization for maybe misconduct, something like that. Very important note there at the bottom for any investigation. If you're going too fast to document everything, you're going too fast. It typically 2 times writing for 1 time, 1 time of investigation, so to speak. So it's about 2 to 1 when we're doing these things of writing everything down, when we did it, what we did this to, understanding that, well, we'll get to that. I don't want to jump ahead yet. So criminal investigation, prosecution under criminal laws, federal, state, or local, could be fines, imprisonment, death, and investigations conducted by law enforcement. Very important, and I believe we'll get to this later, this color of law. So if you do not investigate criminal matters without direction from law enforcement with jurisdiction, and then also make sure that if you act on behalf of law enforcement, you could be acting within the color of law, which puts you in a different set of requirements in terms of subpoenas and evidence and things like that. So very important to understand if you're asked to work with a law enforcement agency, probably work with your organization's legal department to make sure you're covering yourself and the organization. Civil investigation, not law. Plaintiff sues for compensation for loss or relief of some type of dispute. The most common type of investigation that security professionals are called to support, either as a plaintiff or a defendant. Preponderance of the evidence. The defendant is found liable and they may be ordered to pay for damages or to stop an activity that is harming the plaintiff or to honor a contract or agreement into which they previously entered. And what I was going to say earlier, quality of the evidence is the most likely place the case will be challenged by opposing counsel. That's why it's so important to take your time, document everything you've done, when you did it, what you did it against, and what the outcomes were. Regulatory investigation. Now, unfortunately, if you're getting a regulatory investigation, they're probably going to find something. It's just the reality. They're not coming in to not find something. But are you compliant with given regulation or legal requirement? Regulations have the force of law, so it's similar to a criminal investigation. Government agencies perform regulatory investigations to determine whether sufficient evidence exists to prove some violation of the rules or law. So sufficient evidence exists. And again, preponderance of evidence. This could be that 50+1. You have to do this every time, and they found a couple of times you didn't. Well, that's a finding. So some industry standards for this on how to do these investigations. So ISO has a couple there, 27,043, 27,037 for security incidents and digital evidence. Again, you'll have to pay for those. NIST 886 is really good for integrating forensic techniques into incident response. And then 800-101 for mobile device forensics. Both the NIST ones are freely available. I'd recommend, if you're going to be looking at going into any sort of investigation incident response, that you become very familiar with those things. All right. The organization needs policies, and they should reflect any compliance requirements. So think about the way we look at this as building a foundation. Policies are the foundation of the house or your security program. Within that policy, you'll have a purpose, a scope, responsibilities, and compliance. Again, acceptable use maybe is you're defining the acceptable use of computer resources by employees. Scope, what does it cover? And then the responsibilities are what are the specific responsibilities for the different roles. So a lot of policies will have responsibilities, and it'll have security team or CISO, and then it'll have user responsibilities. There could be 3 types of policies: overall program policies, issue-specific policies, and system-specific policies. You can kind of see that a little bit just as a kind of example there on the right of some different policy types. Bring your own device policy would be probably more system or issue specific, right? Acceptable use is going to be an overall program policy. Really important. I don't remember. I wish I could shout out to who told me this originally, and I don't remember, but policies are not meant to be read by everyone. Think of policies, your organization's policies, the way you look at board game instructions. When you sit down to play a board game, does everybody know everything in the instructions on a very extensive board game? No. They might know the high level. They'll know the acceptable use. They know the kind of the general how to play the game, but there's going to be one person typically that is going to be the expert. Same thing with your security policies. Your security team, your security officer, in this case, you as a potential CISSP, you're the one that needs to know these policies, and your users need to know who to ask if they have a question. All right. So then we've got the supporting thing. So we're kind of building our way up. So after we have our policies that kind of tell us, here's what we should be doing, here's what we need to be doing. Our procedures are our step-by-step guidance. So again, going back to the ISO 27001 and 2, 27001 says, here are the things you should be doing. 27002 says, here's how to do it. Same thing here. We have policies that say we need, this example, we need to protect confidentiality, integrity, and availability of PII by hardening the operating system. Great. Why do we keep that high level? Well, again, policies need to be approved at the highest level. They really shouldn't change unless the organization has a significant change. They need to be reviewed annually, but shouldn't be changed. Procedure is then and the standard are owned by maybe somebody in IT or owned by your security team, whatever it is, and they can update those as needed. It's theirs. So standard procedures are mandatory. It's that step-by-step guidance. You can see, download the OS image, download patches, install endpoint protection, configure the firewall, XYZ. It's going to step you through every step required to be compliant with the policy. The standards again are mandatory, and it specifies the use of the policy, or I'm sorry, of technology. So this one, in this case, says use a Nexus 6 laptop, or you might have an encryption standard. These are the types of encryption that we have support. That's what a standard is going to be. Guidelines, these are more recommendations, and think of them as advisories. Guideline is, hey, the procedure is we have to do the patches. The guideline is that we can use an automated installer for patches. And then the baseline, oops, oh my goodness, what is happening here? Baseline benchmarks, these are typically discretionary, and it's a uniform method of implementing a standard. So in this case, the baseline for hardening the operating system is using the CIS security benchmarks. All right. That's it. This was your easy class. We eased you into 200 slides in an hour and a half. I'm going to pause here, check the chat, make sure there's no questions I need to address real quick. But next session, part 2 by Ryan. He'll go into policies a little more, business continuity, personnel, third-party supply chain, risk management, security awareness. And your homework, read up to this point. Probably you should read all of domain 1. Start taking some practice tests. Review the references. Try to post on in the Discord channel. So with that, I'm going to just double check in our chat here, make sure that there's no questions. And while I'm waiting, maybe I'll throw you another dad joke here as a bonus for those that stayed to the end. Why did the invisible man turn down the job offer? He couldn't see himself doing it. All right. Give them.
Hi, Brad. This is Ron. I've been following along in chat and handling questions there. But as a reminder to folks, please put your questions in the Discord questions channel.
Excellent. Yeah. Thank you, Ron. All right. Well, with that, looks like from our other moderators, there's nothing that needs to be addressed. So with that, we will let you go a little early. I'm sure everyone's brain is mush at this point, but thank you all for joining and look forward to seeing you go through this journey.